Hey friends, Venus Retrograde 2025 takes place from March 1st through April 12th, moving between the signs Aries and Pisces. This gives us a rare invitation to reassess what we truly value, to explore our relationships more deeply, and potentially transform how we express love and creativity in our lives. Now, in these times of great change, uncertainty, and certainly stormy seas that we're in right now, there's no time like the present to revisit our values, to clarify what's important to us, and then live according to our highest potential. This is a time to be the light that you want to see in others. Now, before I share a few insights about Venus retrograde, I'd like to acknowledge all those who are suffering as a result of war or rash actions taken by people in positions of power that have destroyed people's livelihoods and threatened long-standing relationships with allies across the world. So even as I shift to reflecting on how we can all work with this energy of Venus retrograde in our personal lives, just know that I'm holding all of you in my thoughts. Well, let's start by looking at the key dates for this Venus retrograde cycle. Venus stationed retrograde at 10 degrees Aries on March 1st, and it stations direct at 24 degrees Pisces on April 12th. So the first thing you want to do is look to see if those are important degrees in your own chart, because this Venus retrograde cycle will be even more important. And don't just look at those signs, look at the signs square and opposite those signs as well. Now, astrologers also consider the shadow periods for a retrograde, and that's going to extend the dates on either side a little bit. You can think of those as the lead up or the wind down to the main event. The pre-retrograde shadow this time runs from January 28th to February 8th, and the post-retrograde shadow takes us from April 13th all the way to May 16th. Now, if you want to be a purist, you want to take into account that full degree range. But my experience is that after Venus stations direct and then moves forward by at least 1 degree, you can also move forward with your own Venus plans. Just move slowly and with awareness. But there's a date right in the middle of the retrograde that not that many people talk about, and that's the inferior conjunction of Venus with the Sun. This time that takes place around March 22nd at 2 degrees Aries. And that conjunction marks a powerful turning point in the Venus retrograde cycle. Dane Rujard described this as a seed moment, where Venus is receiving a new mission from the Sun and its new cycle begins. Since Venus is still retrograde right then, we need to still maintain our reflective state, but at that point, we might also be aware that something new is brewing. And it's from that point forward that we tend to see more reversals at play, because we start to realize that where we thought we stood before or during the retrograde has begun to shift. There's another Venus dynamic that doesn't get as much airplay, though astrologers like Ariel Gutman and Adam Gainsbourg have certainly done it justice in their great books on Venus. And this is an awareness of Venus's changing state, from morning star to evening star and back. For part of its cycle, Venus rises before the Sun as a morning star. And in the other part of its cycle, Venus is an evening star, which means it's only becoming visible after sunset. The ancients saw these two faces of Venus pretty differently. Visuals were really important back then, as you might imagine, and they made a big impression. Interestingly, morning star Venus was seen as a warrior, while evening star Venus was seen as the lover. The Greeks called morning star Venus the light bringer and evening star Venus the setting Venus. In her book Venus Star Rising, Gutman explains the morning star Venus may be instinctually more capable of being a war goddess when the situation arises, by expressing her anger or her rage, becoming an activist for causes, or fighting for what she believes in. The evening star Venus may be much more comfortable in harmonious surroundings and relationships. I'm thinking of maybe conflict avoidant Venus, while denying that anger, hostility, and disharmony even exist. Well, what's especially relevant to this retrograde period is that Venus changes from evening star to morning star right at the inferior conjunction, that midpoint of the retrograde cycle. What's fascinating is that in 2025, Venus is going to make its heliacal rise, which is when it first becomes visible in the sky right after the conjunction, this time at 0 degrees Aries. Wow, that seems important. Ancients would use this timing of the Venus retrograde cycle for timing battles, and with Venus at 0 degrees Aries, I'm curious to see if some of that old meaning shines through even more strongly this year. In the 2012 cycle of Venus retrograde, the film Snow White and the Huntsman was released. This modern, grown-up retelling of the Snow White story was complete with an image of Snow White donning armor and leading her troops into battle against the Dark Queen Ravenna. So you can really get a visual for all of this. If you love fantasy films, this one's held up really well. I just watched it again last year, and it'll tap you into some of the mythic resonance that the ancients associated with this cycle. Now, getting back to the personal, during Venus retrograde, one of the best ways to spend your time is to reassess your values. One practical way to do this is to take a look at your life and follow the money. Now, beyond basic survival needs, our spending habits can reveal what we truly value. So take a little time to review your last 3 to 6 months of purchases. Notice the patterns. Where does your money consistently go? Make sure to look beneath the surface too and reflect on the beliefs that drive those monetary choices. Also ask yourself, if I couldn't spend money on those things, how would that make me feel? Another approach is to follow your energy. Ask yourself, where do I invest the best of my time and energy? Then dig a little deeper and ask why. Sometimes what we think we value when we take a mental inventory doesn't actually match where we put our energy. So take an honest look at how you use your energy and what you use it for. For instance, you might pride yourself on being independent, but when you actually track how you spend your time and energy, you discover that you spend most of your time nurturing relationships with friends or family. As you explore your values during this retrograde period, consider these powerful questions. Are you expressing what you most value in your relationships? Or could you do some work to get into better alignment there? What's the value that you bring to the most meaningful areas of your life, whether that's in your career or with friends or in your familial relationships? Under Venus retrograde, you might also gain awareness around something that's been devalued. Is it time to reassess what you value? Or perhaps to revalue something that you've dismissed or that you've just taken for granted? Now, getting back to Venus and myth, in ancient Mesoamerican culture, Venus was seen as both a love deity and a war deity. These myths tell of Venus shape-shifting from goddess to man and back again during its retrograde journey. And that gender shifting alerts us that Venus retrograde invites us to explore our expression of gender. This is a fruitful time to reflect on how you relate to the feminine, for instance, including what life would look like without the feminine, which of course is going to have most of us become more aware of its value. After some inner exploration over the course of this cycle, you might feel drawn to reclaim aspects of yourself that you previously denied. Venus retrograde can be understood as a mini underworld journey in this way, a time to explore the deeper layers of your psyche and what lies beneath those visible patterns of attraction and repulsion. During this time, you might also get to see the shadow side of Venus, whether that's in yourself or in others. And that could look like vanity or self-indulgence or jealousy or even manipulation in pursuit of what it's attracted to. These shadow aspects might surface through self-reflection or through your relationships with others. Whether you're thinking about how to redefine what you value or how you express those values, Venus retrograde offers a powerful opportunity for deeper authenticity. And here's a great quote for reflection from Tallulah Bankhead, who was born with Venus retrograde in Pisces. And she sums this up perfectly. If I had to live my life again, I'd make the same mistakes, only sooner. Well, if you enjoyed today's video and you want to dive deeper into Venus Retrograde 2025, check out my full webinar at Astrology University, where I explore all of these themes in greater depth. I share practical tools for navigating this important transit, including a special Venus ritual. I share some tips and interpretations for how to integrate Venus retrograde into the houses, and some specific guidance for relationships during this period. I also take a look at a couple of fascinating case studies, like Paul Rudd, who was born with natal Venus retrograde in Aries, and Django Reinhardt and his transformative Venus retrograde in Pisces story. If you want to turn this Venus retrograde into a powerful catalyst for growth and renewal, this webinar might be right up your alley. Well, this year's also momentous in terms of big astrological shifts like Neptune moving into Aries, Uranus moving into Gemini, and Saturn and Neptune forming a conjunction in late Pisces and early Aries. At our upcoming summit, you can hear 12 of your favorite astrologers explore the ins and outs of these big shifts. Sign up at astrologyuniversity.com/summit. The summit includes 4 live talks and 8 pre-recorded talks, but you can also join us after the fact and get all of the replays. I hope to see some of you there, and until next time, please take care of yourselves and of each other. Bye for now.